Hi everyone, welcome to the continuation of part 2 of the Odyssey. So we heard that Scylla took a bite out of 6 of the men in the boat with Odysseus. Let's hear how the men react to that.
A man surf-casting on a point of rock for bass or mackerel, whipping his long rod to drop the sinker and the bait far out, will hook a fish and rip it from the surface to dangle wriggling through the air. So these were borne aloft in spasms toward the cliff. She ate them as they shrieked there in her den, in the dire grapple, reaching still for me, and deathly pity ran me through at that sight, far the worst I ever suffered, questing the passes of the strange sea. We rowed on. The rocks were now behind, Charybdis too, and Scylla dropped astern. Then we were coasting the noble island of the god, where grazed those cattle with wide brows, and bounteous flocks of Helios, lord of noon, who rides high heaven. From the black ship, far still at sea, I heard the lowing of the cattle winding home, and sheep bleating, and heard, too, in my heart, the words of blind Tiresias of Thebes, and Circe of Aea. Both forbade me the island of the world's delight, the sun.
Okay, so remember, both Circe and Tiresias have told Odysseus, you cannot go on the island of Helios where he keeps his cows and his sheep. So now Odysseus and his men are passing this island and the men want to go ashore. So let's hear what Odysseus says.
So I spoke out in gloom to my companions. Shipmates, grieving and weary though you are, listen. I had forewarning from Tiresias and Circe too. Both told me I must shun this island of the sun, the world's delight. Nothing but fatal trouble shall we find here. Pull away then, and put the land astern. That strained them to the breaking point, and cursing, Eurylochus cried out in bitterness, "Are you flesh and blood, Odysseus, to endure more than a man can? Do you never tire? God, look at you. Iron is what you're made of. Here we all are, half dead with weariness, falling asleep over the oars, and you say, no landing. No firm island earth where we could make a quiet supper. No, pull out to sea, you say, with night upon us, just as before, but wandering now and lost. Sudden storms can rise at night and swamp ships without a trace. Where is your shelter if some stiff gale blows up from south or west, the winds that break up shipping every time when seamen flout the Lord God's will? I say, do as the hour demands and go ashore before black night comes down. We'll make our supper alongside, and at dawn put out to sea." Now when the rest said aye to this, I saw the power of destiny devising ill. Sharply I answered, without hesitation, "Eurylochus, they are with you to a man. I am alone, outmatched. Let this whole company swear me a great oath. Any herd of cattle or flock of sheep here found shall go unharmed. No one shall slaughter out of wantonness ram or heifer. All shall be content with what the goddess Circe put aboard."
Okay, so remember, Odysseus is saying, no, we can't stop here. I've been told that if we stop here, bad things will happen and people will die. The men who have been at sea for years and have not had a chance to lay down on solid ground for a while or eat a good meal or remember, even use fire because they're on a wooden ship, get angry, and Eurylochus tries to stir up what we would call a mutiny. So they go against Odysseus and say, we're going whether you like it or not. Okay, so Odysseus says, well, fine, if we're going to go anyway, I can't stop you, but I need you to promise me you won't hurt the cows.
They fell at once to swearing as I ordered, and when the round of oaths had ceased, we found a half-moon bay to beach and moor the ship in, with a fresh spring nearby. All hands ashore went about skillfully getting up a meal. Then, after thirst and hunger, those besiegers were turned away. They mourned for their companions, plucked from the ship by Scylla and devoured, and sleep came soft upon them as they mourned. In the small hours of the third watch, when stars that shone out in the first dusk of evening had gone down to their setting, a giant wind blew from heaven, and clouds driven by Zeus shrouded land and sea in a night of storm. So, just as dawn with fingertips of rose touched the windy world, we dragged our ship to cover in a grotto, a sea cave where nymphs had chairs of rock and sanded floors. I mustered all the crew and said, "Old shipmates, our stores are in the ship's hold, food and drink. The cattle here are not for our provision, or we paid dearly for it. Fierce the god is who cherishes these heifers and these sheep, Helios, and no man avoids his eye." To this my fighters nodded, yes, but now we had a month of onshore gales, blowing day in, day out, south winds or south by east. As long as bread and good red wine remained to keep the men up and appease their craving, they would not touch the cattle. But in the end, when all the barley in the ship was gone, hunger drove them to scour the wild shore with angling hooks for fishes and seafowl, whatever fell into their hands, and lean days wore their bellies thin.
Okay, so Odysseus makes them promise not to hunt the cows, and they say okay. And then for a month, they are stuck on this island because the wind is blowing so hard at them, they can't pull out of the island and into the ocean. So they spend a month there, and while they have food and water and wine from their stores that they had inside the boat that Circe gave them, they're okay. But suddenly at the end of the month, the food runs out and the men get hungry. Then they have to go fishing for food, and they're looking at these fat cows and sheep that are just hanging out on the island, and they're hungry, and so they start to get angry. Let's hear what they say.
The storms continued. So one day I withdrew to the interior to pray the gods in solitude for hope that one might show me some way of salvation. Slipping away, I struck across the island to a sheltered spot out of the driving gale. I washed my hands there and made supplication to the gods who own Olympus, all the gods. But they, for answer, only closed my eyes under slow drops of sleep. Now on the shore, Eurylochus made his insidious plea. "Comrades," he said, "you've gone through everything. Listen to what I say. All deaths are hateful to us, mortal wretches, but famine is the most pitiful, the worst end that a man can come to. Will you fight it? Come, we'll cut out the noblest of these cattle for sacrifice to the gods who own the sky. And once at home, in the old country of Ithaca, if ever that day comes, we'll build a costly temple and adorn it with every beauty for the Lord of Noon. But if he flares up over his heifers lost, wishing our ship destroyed, and if the gods make cause with him, why then I say, better open your lungs to a big sea once for all, than waste to skin and bones on a lonely island." Thus Eurylochus. And they murmured, "Aye," trooping away at once to round up heifers. Now that day tranquil cattle with broad brows were grazing near, and soon the men drew up around their chosen beasts in ceremony.
Okay, so Eurylochus is once again causing problems. So he waits for Odysseus to leave. When Odysseus goes to pray and eventually falls asleep because of the gods, Eurylochus sees this as an opportunity and he says, "Hey, you guys, if we're going to starve anyway, I would much rather die the death of a hero in an epic shipwreck at sea because a god is angry at us for eating his cow than wither away into nothing by starving to death and not eating the cow. So if we're going to die anyway, let's eat the cows." And so all of the men agree to this. Let's see what happens.
They plucked the leaves that shone on a tall oak, having no barley meal, to strew the victims, performed the prayers and ritual, knifed the kine, and flayed each carcass, cutting thigh bones free to wrap in double folds of fat. These offerings with strips of meat were laid upon the fire. Then, as they had no wine, they made libation with clear spring water, broiling the entrails first. And when the bones were burnt and tripes shared, they spitted the carved meat. Just then my slumber left me in a rush. My eyes opened, and I went down the seaward path. No sooner had I caught sight of our black hull than savory odors of burnt fat eddied around me. Grief took hold of me, and I cried aloud, "O Father Zeus and gods in bliss forever! You made me sleep away this day of mischief. O cruel drowsing in the evil hour! Here they sat, and a great work they contrived."
So Odysseus suddenly wakes up as soon as everybody is done killing the cows and putting them on a stick and roasting them over a fire. Okay, so they've killed the cow, they've put it over the fire, and suddenly Odysseus wakes up. Now he smells the food and knows that they're in trouble.
Lampetia, in her long gown, meanwhile, had borne swift word to the overlord of noon. They have killed your kind.
One of the gods has gone and told Helios that they're killing your cows.
The Lord Helios burst into angry speech amid the immortals. "O Father Zeus and gods in bliss forever, punish Odysseus' men. So overweening, now they've killed my peaceful kind, my joy at morning when I climbed the sky of stars, and evening when I bore westward from heaven. Restitution or penalty they shall pay, and pay in full, or I go down forever to light the dead men in the underworld."
So Helios is very upset and wants revenge.
Then Zeus, who drives the storm cloud, made reply. "Peace, Helios. Shine on among the gods. Shine over mortals in the fields of grain. Let me throw down one white-hot bolt and make splinters of their ship in the wine-dark sea."
So Zeus is going to shipwreck them and kill them all.
Calypso later told me of this exchange, as she declared that Hermes had told her. Well, when I reached the sea cave and the ship, I faced each man and had it out. But where could any remedy be found? There was none. The silken beeves of Helios were dead. The gods, moreover, made queer signs appear. Cowhides began to crawl, and beef, both raw and roasted, lowed like kine upon the spits.
So what he's saying is that when he addressed each man, he yelled at them, essentially, and then strange things began to happen. He noticed that when you kill an animal, usually what they would do would be to skin it and set the skin aside to dry so that they could then make it into clothes or into a blanket or into some sort of bag or whatever. And so he noticed that the skin of the cow, which has been separated from the body, is crawling away from the people. Then he notices that the meat that's on the stick over the fire is mooing like a live cow. Okay, so this is when Odysseus knows that something is wrong and the gods are upset with them.
Now 6 full days my gallant crew could feast upon the prime beef they had marked for slaughter from Helios' herd, and Zeus, the son of Cronus, added one fine morning.
Okay, so let's see what happens in Part C.